And then I looked at your website too, and I really like the name of it.
Renewed freedom, yes.
I know. And how did you come up with a name like that?
Well, I've had OCD too, such as yourself. And I just remember when I was a kid, having OCD was like having a nightmare that kept replaying in my mind over and over again like a broken record. And the only time when my mind was ever free was when I was asleep or when it was just occupied with other activities that I didn't have to think about the OCD fears. So for me, gaining relief from OCD is literally being free of it.
Right.
And finding that freedom or gaining the relief to achieve that freedom takes so much effort. And then when you're finally able to feel and experience that relief, it's like this renewed freedom that you experience. So that's how I came up with the name of it, although some people tell me that it's kind of it's not a, it gets confused with some of the other political stuff.
I like the name myself because it caught my attention.
Absolutely.
And because I saw in your one article, it was a springtime renewal, and you called yourself a freedom connoisseur.
Yes.
And I really liked that idea. Can you explain more about being a freedom connoisseur?
Ever since I was a kid, I've always felt that I don't want to live my life being held back by fear. And I think when I was a kid, I lived so much of my life in fear. Everything was fear-based for me. That when I finally figured out how to beat OCD by confronting fears, I kind of went to the extreme where I even went skydiving just to conquer that fear of,
that's cool.
falling out of a plane. So because of that, I feel like I am kind of like a freedom connoisseur because I can just keep pushing myself. And the more that I push myself to conquer whatever fear it is that I am experiencing, that gives me that freedom so that I'm not living in the prison that OCD has created for me.
Right.
And I'm taking my life, the control of my life back, rather than relinquishing that control to OCD. So in a sense, I kind of am a freedom connoisseur because I do push myself to the extreme to make sure that I do what I want to do, not because of what OCD tells me that I can or cannot do.
Right. And that's why I go caving too, because
I
of,
know.
like you said, the skydiving. I feel so much freedom when I'm caving.
Right, because you're in that present moment when you're
Yeah.
caving. You can't be ruminating
I
about
know.
fears and worries. You have to allow your mind to be present when you're caving.
Right.
Just like any time that you are exposing yourself, pushing yourself to your limits, you've got to be mindfully here. There's
Yeah.
no way that your mind can be anywhere else except for that,
Right.
that experience right then and there.
Because you also have to be careful so you don't get killed too.
That is absolutely
So
true.
It forces you to be in the present moment,
That
especially
is
when you're doing
true.
the vertical caving. And it's like those CPUs just pushed out of my mind.
You have no room.
I know.
You have no room to be thinking about OCD at that time.
Yeah.
Because your body's natural response to potential danger is to increase your fight-or-flight response. And that fight-or-flight response is what we perceive as anxiety, right?
Yeah.
However, the way that I think about the fight-or-flight response is that I can always adjust it, reframe my thinking, adjust my perspective so that it's not anxiety, so that I'm actually experiencing thrill and excitement.
Yeah.
When I talk about the fight or flight response, when I'm teaching about the fight or flight response, I always take the comparison of two people going skydiving. What's happening physiologically is, your heart's going and you're breathing heavier and you're feeling the jitters. And that is what's happening objectively. However, one person can experience that and go, oh wow, we're going to jump out of this plane and it's going to be so fun and it's the best experience ever. I feel exhilarated.
Yeah.
Whereas the second person who can be experiencing the same feeling can be thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to jump out of this plane. We're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die. You know, and it's the difference in how you think about it that makes it easier to engage in those fearful situations.
Right.
So you're probably experiencing thrill.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're caving.
Yeah. It's like the rational fears are easier to deal with than the irrational fears that I make up in my head.
Absolutely. A lot of people think that if it's irrational, then it's OCD. However, the truth is, most of our fears are irrational. Of course, there are going to be fears that are rational. For example, if there really is a saber tooth in front of you and you want to run from it, that's rational, right?
Right.
However, how often does that actually occur?
Right.
Most of the time we may experience a fear, and then it's our minds that take it to the extreme and takes it to the worst consequence and catastrophizes the real situation, which may not be as dangerous as we're perceiving it to be.
Yeah. I also have social anxiety disorder. This whole weekend has been like exposure for me.
Right. Well, this is an exposure now for you.
Exactly.
Then, right?
Because I've been anxious about this all week long, and you probably can tell I'm feeling anxiety at the moment.
I think you're doing awesome, and I think what you're doing to raise awareness and to educate the public is awesome.
Thank you.
And the more that we can inform the public of how debilitating OCD can be, the more voice we can give to OCD. Because I think, the unfortunate thing is that the public thinks that OCD is this quirky disease. I think from all of the media attention, it's either this really quirky disease or it is a disease where people are just really crazy. And I don't think the public understand that because OCD, there's not a lot of behavioral manifestations other than the compulsions, which may appear quirky. However, they don't experience what is happening to us mentally when we're ruminating about our fears, which is why, for me, it was literally like having nightmares replaying in my head over and over again.
Exactly.
However, the public doesn't see that. So because they don't see that, they really don't see how debilitating OCD can be.
Because the OCD, when I do my compulsions, it's like the most horrible feeling in the world. It's like I'm just trapped, and it's just like horrifying. And what I've explained to people, was I went caving one time and I fell down the entrance pit and I broke my arm here.
Oh, wow.
And the bone just snapped like that. And I was able to get myself out of the pit. My friend lowered my climbing gear down to me, and I climbed out with a broken arm and went to the hospital then. And but that fall down the pit was still nowhere near as terrifying as being trapped in an OCD compulsion. Right. Even though that fall was scary, it's still not as bad as OCD.
And I think that's a great example because I don't think a lot of people understand that. And what is so interesting that you just point out, when you fell, there was really no more uncertainty to it.
Right, exactly.
You've met your uncertainty, and therefore that fear just ended. However, when you're left to your mind to take you to those awful places, it will just keep going with no end. And therefore that's why it feels like it's a trap, and there's no getting out of it.
I read one of your articles, what doesn't destroy me makes me stronger. Can you explain more?
Nietzsche is one of my favorite philosophers. And that is actually his quote right there. What doesn't destroy me makes me stronger. And I want to be able to differentiate that from just positive thinking, though. Because I've actually had to talk about this with a patient recently, and being able to differentiate what that means, what doesn't destroy me makes me stronger, versus just positive thinking. And, you know, positive thinking is BS to me. You know, that's basically reassuring yourself, telling yourself, oh, everything is going to be fine, and oh, I'm still this strong person. And that's not what I do. You know, I do what I call optimistic thinking, which is, you know, all hell may break loose. Yet, if I can overcome this challenge, then that only gives me more strength and more skills to deal with the next hell that breaks loose. So that's essentially what that quote means to me, that through all of my struggles with OCD, each exposure that I do equips me with strength to be able to confront the next exposure, so that you literally are building strength. It's kind of like exercising your brain, you know, like lifting weights. However, you're kind of lifting weights with your brain muscles. And each time you engage in an exposure, you're strengthening your brain muscles. And that allows you to deal with more fears and more fears. So that is basically what I believe in. And you know, we know with all of the brain scans and the research that we're doing now, that's actually what happens with the neural pathways in our brains, is that we're building new connections. Just from doing exposures, our brains are literally getting stronger.
Yeah, I read a lot about that, and it's really interesting.
And, you know, that also gives us information that it is a neurochemical disease. It's not just our personality trait, or it's not just something that's only mental. You know, there's a organic component to it, which empowers people, because then it's the same as relating it to diabetes or heart disease, you know.
Yeah, because like yesterday, I felt more anxious yesterday, especially just walking in the door of the Marriott. It's like, oh, here it goes.
That's right. You're here to confront your fears.
I know.
And this is the trigger. If you ever get a chance, you know, we do things called social rejection exposures, where we actually take patients out. It's actually a social anxiety boot camp that we take patients out, and we all do silly things in public, and the purpose is to get that attention from the public, that, oh, we're looking odd, and that in itself is very, very empowering.
I like what you called it, like reverse narcissism. And never thought about that before, but it's so true.
It is. You know, the way that social anxiety is to me, it is, you know, reverse narcissism. Because if you think about people with narcissism, they have a lack of self. And therefore, because of their lack of self, they want the attention to be focused on them, and they want to feel like I'm better than what I truly feel. However, people with social anxiety, it's actually the reverse. They're asking for that attention. They feel like the attention is all on me, right? And don't look at me because I don't want you to see my flaws. However, if you think mathematically, is it even possible that everyone is feeling that same way and believing that to be true? That's just mathematically not possible. That most of us are actually too focused on ourselves to be able to notice anyone else.
Right.
And we're too focused on our own flaws to notice anyone else's flaws. However, with people with social anxiety disorder, it's take that camera away from me because you're going to see my flaw. And everyone has their cameras on me, and everyone will see my flaws. And that's just mathematically not even possible.
Yeah. Because I'm always thinking, what do other people think about me?
See, if you do the social rejection exposures, then it doesn't really matter what people think about you, right? Because the goal is to push yourself to behave even more oddly than you do. And when you're able to just go out and act like a clown, it's kind of it's another freedom that you experience. It's, you not caring about what other people think.
How can people who have OCD, if they don't have the financial resources or health insurance, are there ways that they can find help? I mean, I know of ways. The OCD Foundation, and but do you know of?
I think there are a lot of research studies that are going on for patients with OCD, and if you're a participant, if you qualify to participate in the research studies, then the treatment is at no cost, or there might be a minor cost to it. Most of the research studies that I'm aware of, there's no cost to the treatment. However, you have to qualify. So I would say that's the first thing. Go to the OC Foundation website and look and see where the research studies are being conducted, and get yourself on that list. There are also support groups that hopefully you'll have one in your community. A lot of people are now starting online support groups, and perhaps from that you'll be able to get information from someone who may have had treatment and gain more information that way. There are also a lot of treatment centers where they offer like a sliding scale treatment. So you'll also need to go to the OC Foundation website, and under find a therapist, I believe, you'll see whether the therapist offers a sliding scale. So, for example, at Renewed Freedom Center, we do offer a sliding scale for patients such as yourself having financial difficulties. In terms of the insurance coverage, we actually fight insurance companies all the time to get the highest benefit for our patients. And I think because, at least in California, OCD is under the parity diagnosis. Insurance companies, by law, have to provide equal coverage as they would to any medical condition. It's about fighting your insurance company, and actually Dr. Fred Penzel has an article out that is about fighting your insurance companies and how to go about doing it so that you can get the most benefit. Because what a lot of insurance companies will do is they'll say, oh yes, well, we have a list of providers who are specialists in OCD or who treat OCD. And the truth is that because there's no quality control with insurance panels, anyone can say, oh yes, I treat OCD, I treat bipolar, I treat schizophrenia, I treat everything, right? Being able to treat everything doesn't make you a specialist.
Right.
So I think an important point is when you are looking to contact these therapists, these providers, you want to ask them questions such as, how many OCD cases have you treated? How many of them are successful? What theoretical orientation do you treat from? What are some of the therapeutical approaches that you take? What strategies do you use? I think if you ask those questions, a therapist who actually is an OCD specialist will be able to provide those answers to you. And if you're asking a therapist who, is just a general practitioner, then you probably won't be getting a lot of honest answers to those questions. any therapist who doesn't say exposure and response prevention, you can just take them off your list.
Right.
And then what you do is you get all of that information, you record all of that information, and you go back to your insurance company and say, hey, I contacted all of these people. And this is the response that I got from them. So you don't have a provider that actually treats
Right.
OCD.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time.
Right. You can go to Fred Penzel's website, and he has that article out
Okay.
about fighting your insurance company.
Yeah, because back in the 70s, I was hospitalized like 4 times between 75 and 1981, and they didn't know anything about OCD. I mean, I didn't even know of the term back then.
Right.
And I spent like 6 months in one hospital, and it was abusive therapy. It was basically, if I did my compulsions, basically they just punished me for it.
So it was like behavior modification.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. And they locked me in my room and stuff like that. Or my psychologist just would shove me against the wall, trying to act like tough guy, shape up, and stuff like that. And of course, my OCD just kept getting worse. And I ended up spending 6 months in there. And my parents finally pulled me out because they realized it's not working. And my memories of that hospital are still vivid.
And
today.
you're probably traumatized from that whole experience too. And I think in working with kids, I actually hear a lot about that when parents, because a lot of the kids go misdiagnosed. And a lot of kids, by the time they reach a therapist, they've been diagnosed with anything from autism to oppositional defiance to ADHD, when the culprit is usually OCD. And some of those conditions, such as ADHD and oppositional defiance, behavior modification is the way to go. However, for OCD, it's actually going to backfire and make it worse.
Yeah.
So I completely understand where you're coming from, and unfortunately, that problem still exists today. And with the work that you guys are doing to raise awareness,
Hopefully nobody else will ever have to go through that.
Yes.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yes.
And my mom had OCD, and she committed suicide in 1992. And she was drinking a lot at the same time. And I was drinking a lot too at the time. And I quit drinking in 95. I went to AA, and I haven't had a drink since then.
Good for you.
And that was part of it, was because after my mom committed suicide, I saw myself going down the same path. I was drinking a lot, and my compulsions were getting worse. I thought to myself, I've got to do something. I'm going to end up killing myself.
Right.
So I went to Alcoholics. That was the first really big step of me getting a handle on my OCD. I got a sponsor in AA, and I told them all about my OCD and my hospital visits and all that stuff. So the first time I was sharing my experiences and my disorder with somebody outside of my family or outside of therapy, and it helped tremendously. And I really like your articles, and it's a real pleasure to meet you.
Yes.
They're behind the
here.
articles.
Same here. Well, I think what you're doing is really great. So, and it takes a lot of courage to be able to put yourself out there and let the world know what you're doing and what's actually happening. So, that's really awesome.